No, I know that.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charlie Parker. I'm a very grateful alcoholic. This is this is an amazing crowd. I just want to tell you, just being willing to show up on a Friday night and talk about AA and the steps in the Big Book makes you my heroes. It's really. I hope we have some fun this weekend. I've always said if we're not having fun, we're messing up the deal. But I look around the room. We got a lot of friends in this room. I can't start naming or I'll forget somebody, but there's a lot of people here that are real special to us, but I mean, Dave and Polly and James, and Katie and I were all in, talk about an exotic trip to carry the message. We were in Australia and New Zealand last March. So it's really good to see you guys. That was a very special time, and it was kind of funny because there was a big group of us, and when we first got over there, the sentiment was kind of like, why do we need these Yanks coming over here to tell us about Alcoholics Anonymous? And hopefully there was some impact there. It was one of the most special events I've ever been involved in. It was one of those where the speakers knew it was something special. The people that were attending it knew it was something special, and it wound up being something really special to us. But I just want to say hi to a lot of my friends, and then there's a lot of people that we're just meeting for the first time. So. I said my name is Charlie Parker. My home group is the Primary Purpose Group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Austin. We meet on Tuesday nights at, they just changed the name of the church. I've been saying for years at Faith United Methodist, but now it's called the Austin New Church, but it's at 2701 South Lamar. And if you're ever in Austin on a Tuesday night, come see us. We'd love to try to show you the same kind of hospitality that you're showing us here. And we are a Big Book study. We study the Big Book line by line, week after week, and it's just a lot more fun than it sounds like. There was a time when I might not have been terribly drawn to that meeting, where you're like, so again next week, we're going to. But I mean, we have a group about this size. On Tuesday nights, we have about 225, 250 people every Tuesday night studying the Big Book in Austin. And I like to say that Alcoholics Anonymous is making a big comeback in AA, and because a lot of us have, and we're gonna roll around. There's a lot of ground we're gonna try to cover this weekend. But just out of my own curiosity, how many people in the room have less than a year of sobriety? Oh, wow. Welcome. All right. And I see some people coming in. Raise your hand if there's any empty seats at your table. Keep them up long enough for these ladies to find a seat. Okay. What about 1 year to 5 years? All right. And 5 to 10? Nice. And 10 to 20? Pretty good mix. And then over 20 years? Wow, this is fantastic. I swear, at one point I saw Jim walk in, and then I saw Joe and Tammy walk in, and Dave and Polly and James, and I'm like, this is a lot of pressure, But we should have some fun tonight. My sobriety date is March 22nd of 1985, and I'm truly grateful for that. I'm coming up on a birthday that I very much look forward to because there's a really dark period of every year where Katie has 1 year more than I do, and that comes to an end next March 22nd. So I'll at least for 6 months anyway. So we have essentially the same amount of sobriety, and we grew up together in AA. Just to give you a little history, we were best friends. We had the same home group. We were best friends for 20 years. I was at her wedding. We were literally like brother and sister for 20 years, and then her husband passed away, unfortunately, about 15 years ago, and I was in between marriages, and so we became a couple.
Am I on?
No. Hello. Oh, what a shame you're not on, honey.
I just wanted to be sure you heard the in between there.
I think I've proven that I'm not afraid to commit. But
I'll try to be quiet.
yeah, and then we've been a couple for 15 years, and we have a lot of fun. She's the best AA I know, and AA is alive and well in our house, and I'm just really, really grateful for it. I don't have to go outside the bedroom to do a 10th step most of the time and get a really good take on it. Sometimes a little more take than I'd like, you know. I was like, could you just be my cheerleader this time, you know? But I want to thank Jerry and Bill, Bill Shea and Jerry, who we just met. We have been putting this on. I think this is the third one. Is that right? Yeah. And then I want to thank Jerry and Jill. And I just want to thank you for taping and for all the work that's gone into putting this thing on. You know, if you've ever been involved in something like this, you know there's just a lot of work that goes into one of these things coming together. And you know, if it's like the people at home, there's a lot of people that didn't do a darn thing that are convinced that it could have been done just a little bit better. You know, and that's the fellowship I crave. You know, that's my people. But I just want to thank them for having us here, and you know, and it's all driven. I've talked to every one of them, and the driving force throughout is trying to invigorate AA and get it stronger in the meetings and in the fellowship, and hopefully after an event like this, you see some ripple effect through the community, and there's some movement and that sort of thing. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground this weekend. Now, before I get much further, I want to say that I don't carry a lot of literature with me, but I have a email sign-up sheet here that if you'll put your name on this email list some point in the weekend, when we get home, I'll type all those email addresses in, and my daughter's very clever. At the top of this, she put, if we have a hard time reading your writing, you'll have a hard time reading our emails. It takes me forever to get those things typed in, but that's there. We've got some cards with our phone numbers on them and stuff. And then another thing, just before I forget about it, who has a big book from before 1994? Anybody got one with the circle and triangle in it? Does it have, you know, up until about 94, they had the circle and triangle on the title page of the big book, and they took it out over some copyright issues and that sort of thing, and there's plenty to talk about there, but we are putting it back in the big book, one book at a time. So if you come up during the break, I'll put a stamp in your book like that one, and then we do a little, hopefully we'll get around to doing the circle and triangle exercise at some point. There's a lot I want to talk about. I'll warn you in advance. Somebody just gave me the coolest t-shirt. Let me see that t-shirt. I got a little ADD working up here, and somebody just gave me the most beautiful t-shirt. Look what it says. It says, ask me about my ADD or cake. I like cake. What's today? I saw a tree. Hi. Is that good? I mean, so there'll be times during the talk where I'll say, you know, we're going to get back to that later. And what that means is that this ain't the appropriate time in the presentation to bring forth that piece of information. But when I tell you we're coming back to it later, we're probably not coming back, you know. So I always get real excited when I actually circle around to one, you know. But there's a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to try to, we got a lot of time tonight. Usually we just do steps 1 and 2 on Friday night, and I'm really impressed at how many people were able to make it over here for a 5:30 start on a Friday night. This is very, very impressive. Now,
so we're going to do 1, 2, and a little bit.
We're going to do 1, 2, and a little 3. We spend a lot of time in 3. One of the things I want to tell you is that I've been sober almost 33 years, and during that time, I've had different levels and different experiences in AA, and hit walls at different times, different levels of surrender. And we're going to talk about a lot. I'm not a guy that has just crushed AA from my very first meeting, and there's been some times that were up and down, and there's been a lot of growth out of that, and I've had different experiences with the steps that we're going to try to talk about. And why did I say that?
I wasn't following you. Sorry.
You ever see those shepherds where they got the dog out in the field, the border collie running around, and then the shepherd just has to do his eyes like that, and that's kind of what we got going on up here.
I fell short.
There's times where I go, why did I say that? But we're going to talk about my biggest spiritual awakening happened at 17 years of sobriety, and hope it turned out that step 1 meant something different than I thought it meant for a long time, and step 3 meant something way different from what I thought it meant. And we're definitely going to talk a lot about what happens in pages 60 to 63. And my poor sponsees, you must think, oh no, I've got a sponsor that only read 3 pages out of the big book, because we spend a lot of time in 60 to 63, and so when I say we're going to do 1, 2, and part of 3, we're going to spend a lot of time on step 3 and the way that presents itself in the rest of the work. But rolling right into it, anything else?
Nope.
It's important to say, though, that we're not like experts from GSO that have been sent down to tell you how you're screwing up AA or anything like that. We're gonna talk about our experience with it, and hopefully, one of the things I think we'll do before we go any further. How many of you are familiar with the set-aside prayer? Look how popular it's getting. It's amazing. I'll give you a little history on the set-aside prayer. My sponsor was a guy named Mark Houston, and his sponsor was Don Pritz. Pritz sponsored a lot of people that I'm real fond of, Joe Hawk and Tom Ewell and Mary Thayer, and I guess insert initials for all those last names I just threw out there. But this set-aside prayer is real handy for somebody that's been around for a while. I use it a lot if you've been around for a while, because I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when I read the book, I'm not looking for new information. I call it a confirmation bias, where I'm not looking for new information as much as I'm looking for confirmation of ways that I'm already right. So and this probably doesn't happen in Jacksonville, but it's terrible in Texas, and so what happens is I wind up reading the book and I'm going, jaywalker, and then I'm going, see, now you can't tell me anything about this line. I've already got it highlighted and underlined, and when I do this, and so what happens is I'm nodding at the stuff that I already agree with, and then anything that doesn't fit into my current understanding, I just let it go. And if you ever see powerful stuff in the book, where you go, when did they put that in there, and why have I never seen it? I was riding along with one of my favorite sponsees one day, and he goes, I hear you talking about all the stuff you missed in the book for a long time. And I go, yeah. He goes, it makes me wonder what I'm missing. And I said, oh yeah. And he goes, I know it can't be anything big. And I was like, really? You know that? Wow, what a comforting awareness that must be. And then something happens where you go, wow, little things can change it. But this set-aside prayer, I'm giving you some history before we say it, but what happened was Joe had been over, and he was a real spiritual seeker. He'd been over in India with the ashrams and the Dalai Lama and a lot of Eastern influence stuff and a lot of meditation stuff. And he came back and he goes to Don Pritz and he says, Don, would you sponsor me? And Don said, well, look, I'll sponsor you, but we're going to set all that crap aside and we're going to come out of the big book. And from that, Joe crafted the set-aside prayer. He always gave Pritz credit for writing the set-aside prayer, and Don said, I didn't write it. I just told you we're going to set that aside and we're going to focus on the big book. But what it's saying, and I'm just going to say it right quick, God, please help us to set aside everything we think we know about ourselves, the program, the big book, the fellowship, and even you, God. We ask for an open mind so that we could have a new experience. Help us to see the truth. Amen. I like to do that one before I read the book. I like to do that before I listen to a CD. There's a lot of things there. It's amazing how when you do the set-aside prayer and then all of a sudden a word or a phrase will just come off the page where you go, wow, I never saw that before. And so anyway, I'm just so excited to be here, and I'll settle down at some point. But I'm going to go ahead and get going because, I swear, we were at a thing the other day, and they read so much stuff. I'm not going to say where it was, but by the time you get ready to speak, you think they're going to go, now Bob is going to read the Old Testament, and it's like in Hebrew, but so anyway, Katie, you'll just have to hang in there. I want to talk. Okay, so anyway, we're going to get going on step one, and basically what I like to do is talk about like our approach to the steps going through the book. We're not going to study the big book line by line, chapter by chapter, but we're going to talk about what my take is on how I go through the steps out of the book, and what a lot of, and then Katie's take and that sort of thing, and I hope it's helpful. But starting off talking about step one. It's interesting, because I had an experience with step one well into sobriety that was pretty significant. And so sometimes you think, well, I've been around a minute. I'm not drinking anymore or anything. Why do I need to talk about step one? Well, there are two reasons. One is it's incredibly motivating for me, and it's super powerful when you're working with the new guys. If there are any, I'm going to talk about some things that I think are mistakes made in AA, if there are any mistakes being made in AA. But one of the things that I see is I think sometimes we throw the doors wide open and we don't spend any time talking about a guy's drinking and becoming convinced that he's alcoholic or convincing him that he's alcoholic. And it's such a powerful piece of the work. When you think about step one, our whole recovery program is in about this much of the book, and about the first 103 pages, and 44 pages of that and the doctor's opinion are on step one. Because it's so powerful. What made AA a big deal is an understanding of three things. There was three things that came together when AA hit the ground that made our fellowship a big deal, because they've been trying to get drunk sober for a long time, and AA far and away has sobered up more of us than all the other stuff put together. And what made AA a big deal is an understanding of three different things. It was an understanding of the problem, an understanding of the solution to that problem, and then a program of action that would bring about that solution. And it's beautifully laid out in our book. In the doctor's opinion, in the first 44 pages of the book, it talks about the step one. But when it talks about, do I have time to tell it?
Sure.
I got one little joke. We talk about coming out of our own experience, and we're going to talk a lot about our experience this weekend. There's a little joke I like to tell that if we're not already warmed up, it's a joke just to kind of warm you. But we talk a lot about coming out of our own experience, and it always reminds me of this guy that was driving along one day, and he sees he's passing by this farmhouse, and he sees a sign that says "Talking Dog for Sale." And I know that some of you have heard this joke before. Some of you have heard me tell this joke before, but it's a good joke, and I like the way I tell it. So, and this guy's driving along one day, and he sees a sign, and it says "Talking Dog for Sale," and he can't stand it. He goes up to the farmhouse, and he goes, "So you got a talking dog?" And the guy says, "Yeah, he's around back." And he goes around back, and this red hound dog is laying there, and he says, "So you can talk?" And the dog says, "Well, I certainly can." He goes, "My gosh, how did that happen?" He goes, "Well, it's quite an interesting story." He said, "When I was young, I started picking up some language skills from the humans around me. And as I got older, I started developing further language skills. And I started working with slang and colloquialisms and some of the local expressions." And he said, it's made a fascinating life for me. He said, I had a 19-year career with the Drug Enforcement Administration. And I was able to infiltrate some situations that no human agent would have ever been able to get into. And he said, "I've traveled the world. I've stayed in some of the finest hotels. I've eaten the cooking of some of the greatest chefs of the world." He said, "But really more interesting than me," he said, "some of my pups have developed foreign language skills and have become international diplomats." He said, "I have 3 of my pups right now. They're in the United Nations as international diplomats." And the guy says, "My gosh, it's been fascinating talking to you." And he goes back up front where that farmer's sitting there, and he goes, "My God, man, how much do you want for that dog?" And the guy goes, "I don't know, $40? And he's like, "Why on earth would you sell a fabulous dog like that for $40? And the farmer thinks for a minute and goes, "None of that crap he told you is true." it's kind of like that around here. It doesn't really matter how good the story is if it's not my experience. A drunk can smell BS from 1,000 yards away, and it talks about that a lot in our book. It talks about identification, and that's what we're going to talk about a lot tonight. But when it talks about for an alcoholic, for a message to have depth and weight, or for a message to interest an alcoholic, it must have depth and weight. And it talks about it on Roman numeral 28 and on number 18, and we're going to get around to talk about that. Sometimes I'll mention page numbers, and I'll try to, but I won't always give you time to turn to them, and it's going to be tough. But we're going to talk a lot about Roman numeral 28. But I'm going to hop around because my job, first of all, my job tonight is to lay out the problem. What is the problem with alcoholism? And so because when we talk about being a recovered alcoholic, the very first problem, all this is right here is the first 164 pages of a large print copy of the AA Big Book. My sponsor is Myers R. now, and he's a bookbinder, and this is one of my most prized possessions. Polly's got a beauty there. But all this is a large print copy of the Big Book, and on the title page is the first promise in the Big Book. It says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And it's kind of funny. I mean, so already on the title page, the book is saying something different from what I've been hearing in meetings for a long time. And before we go much further, I want to say one thing funny about I don't care whether you say recovered or recovering, but sometimes, it's interesting to ask yourself, where did if I have an opinion on this, where did my opinion come from? And is it consistent with the text of the Big Book? Because one of the things that I think is peculiar about AA is whenever we form a firing squad, we always form a circle, and so we got some of our best members picking each other off over whether it's, recovered or recovering or sponsee or protege or twofold illness, threefold illness, and it's funny. One of the things I love is when I change my mind. I've got a new one I've been working with. It's the sound of an alcoholic changing their mind. The sound of an alcoholic changing their mind is we go, Just like that. I mean, for years, I was a twofold illness guy. I was threefold. I was physical, allergy, mental obsession, spiritual malady, all working in. And I'm talking to my sponsor one day, Myers, and I said, I know you're a twofold guy. And he goes, yeah. And I said, but I'm a threefold guy. The way I look at it, you got the physical allergy, the mental obsession, and the spiritual malady. And he goes, but Charlie, a lot of people suffer from a spiritual malady, but theirs doesn't manifest in an obsession to drink alcohol. And I went, Twofold it is, 20-year belief system reversed, but so anyway, we're going to get talking about this a little bit. But when we talk about having recovered, what are we talking about having recovered from? And in the foreword to the first edition, it says I like to talk about this some because there's a lot of places in the book where it says we, and you know who they're talking about when they say we? It says we. This is in the foreword of Alcoholics Anonymous. Are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So when they're talking about this we, they're talking from the perspective of our founders that have experienced this recovery process and have recovered from this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So there's going to be a lot of times where they say we in the book, and then it says to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Well, if we're talking about having recovered, what are we talking about having recovered from? And it's this hopeless state of mind and body that they talk in there. And I want to talk about that for a minute, because on page 20 in the book, it says, doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. The first thing I do when I sit down with a new guy, my job is to give him what I call a fatal dose of alcoholism, or a step one experience. The first thing we're going to do is sit down and I love the way they talk about it in the book, because I have a new thing for Fred in the book. I have just fallen in love with Fred in the last few years. And, and with Fred, he's back in the hospital, and it says they came and they laid out the problem for him. It says on page 42, it talks about they laid out the problem. They cited dozens of cases out of their own experience. Now, why would they do that? Why would they come to this guy in the hospital and tell him dozens of cases of their alcoholism out of their own experience? Well, because he goes on to say that this process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that he could do the job himself. That's that step one experience we're looking for with this guy. And, because there was a treatment center at home that used to say, well, you work the first step getting here. Anybody heard that one? You worked the first step getting here. Or I even heard one where they said you worked the first 3 steps getting here. And, that wasn't my experience. And it wasn't Dr. Bob's experience. It wasn't Fred's experience. Because for Dr. Bob, in the foreword of the second edition, it says he had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. He'd been in the Oxford movement for a couple of years at that time. He suspected that a spiritual remedy would solve his problem, and he even had a program of action. Remember we talked about problem, solution, program of action? Well, he understood. He thought he knew what the solution was, and the Oxford movement had a 6-step little program of action, but he didn't understand what the problem was. The book is full of references where they talk about a guy having 2 out of 3 of those things coming together. But it's when the 3 of them come together, problem, solution, program of action, that something magic happens. And it's because look what happened with Bob. It says when the broker, that's Bill, gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he'd never been able to muster before. He sobered, never to drink again, up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another alcoholic, as no one else could. What we're speaking to is identification. The 2 main things we have to offer in Alcoholics Anonymous are identification and power. And this identification it talks about it on page 18, and it says, I love drunks. We got to be the only group of people. Listen to what it says. It says, highly competent it's the middle of page 18. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. We got to be the only group of people that'll go pay a psychiatrist $225 an hour and lie to him the whole time. I mean, seriously though. I mean, if I go in there and he goes, "Do you drink, Mr. Parker?" I'm not going to go, "Oh yeah, buddy. Yeah, I likes me some drinking. I like to get a case of beer and a half gallon of vodka in the morning and just see what the day brings." I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, well, yeah. I might have a couple of beers if I'm mowing the lawn or something. Like I've mowed the lawn lately, but and then it's just strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends find us even more approachable than do the psychiatrist or the doctor. And here's where it gets interesting. I love, Joe and Charlie used to talk about that squiggly writing in the big book, and it says, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who's properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. What did they say? They said until that understanding of one drunk talking to another one is reached, it says little or nothing can be accomplished. It's that important. It's that important that out of all 12-step programs that are out there, we're talking about singleness of purpose now for just a second. Out of all the 12-step programs that are out there, the only difference in any of them is the first half of the first step and the middle part of the 12th step. What I'm powerless over and who I carry the message to, because of this identification chunk that they're talking about here on page 18. It's that important, because otherwise we'd all meet in the same room. But you think about all these different, out of all the 12-step programs there's a bunch of them. There's, Alcoholics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous. I even heard there's a lip balm addicts Anonymous. And case anybody's ever suffered from that heartbreaking malady. But I swear every time you say that, there's somebody in the audience with their CarMax going, I feel you, man. I know exactly what you're talking about. But out of all those 12-step programs, the only difference in any of them is the first half of the first step and the middle part of the 12-step, what they're powerless over and who they carry the message to. It's that important. So when we talk about singleness of purpose, we're not trying to keep the filthy dope fiend out of our pristine AA meetings. We're desperate that, because I mean, like, hopefully you'll never hear any of my sponsees say in an AA meeting, say I'm an alcoholic and anything else, because it doesn't apply. That identification is what we're speaking to. So in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, we're identifying as alcoholics. And if I go to a gamblers meeting, we're going to identify as gamblers, because that's what we're talking about. That's like what we're identifying on in that room. So saying that I'm an alcoholic and anything else would be like saying I'm an alcoholic and a contractor, or I'm an alcoholic and a Texan. It doesn't apply to what we're talking about in this room. I hope it makes sense, because it's not that we're trying to keep the dope fiend out of the room. We're desperate that a guy find a fellowship that he identifies in as much as I identify in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the things we're really lucky about in Austin is that we have a very broad recovery base. And dope fiends don't have to hide out in AA meetings pretending to be Alcoholics Anonymous, And so there's a lot of fellowships out there that support different people, and it's funny, this identification, it doesn't really make much sense until it's not there. You ever had somebody try to identify and it's just not quite there? I was in treatment around Christmas time, and I'm a big boy, and I was interested in Christmas dinner, and we were just sitting down to eat, and I had this big plate of food. It was turkey and dressing and mashed potatoes and giblet gravy and cranberry, and I'm just sitting down, and these double doors swing open, and in walks 5 do-gooders from one of the local churches, and they have come to sing Christmas carols to us heathen alcoholics. Are you feeling my excitement? And because now I don't get to eat, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching this lady, and she's coming around the room. We're all sitting around the wall, kind of, and she's running, and she says something to this guy, and then she says something to this lady, and then she leans over and says something, and and she's coming in my direction. And when she gets to me, she leans over and she goes, "Are you a patient here?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "I know exactly what you're going through." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes. I was once addicted to caffeine." And I was like, "Oh, ain't that a bitch?" Yeah, wow, yeah. That's tough. Let me ask you, did you ever pawn your mom's sterling silver to get a can of Folgers, and bless her heart, she's trying to identify, but it's just not really there. But when that identification is there, it's powerful enough that if Rick is telling me, I can tell from talking to Rick that he drank like I drank, and if you're telling me that you got over it, once that identification is in place, I might be willing to take actions that I don't even believe in yet, just because you're saying this is what I did. That's how important that identification is. So I wanted to spend a minute talking about that. But if Silkworth's definition was so helpful to Bob, let's talk about what Silkworth said. Because on page 30, it says something really interesting. Middle of the page, it says, there they are again. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or fixing to be, has to be smashed. It says, or presently, maybe, but do they say fixing over here? Oh, okay, all right, good. I've said it in Canada before, and they're like, "What?" You're like, "No, it means preparing to." It doesn't mean repairing something. It's preparing. But it says So if I'm going to fully concede to my innermost self, there's a lot going on. I love to break this book down, because all that stuff you can read it really fast and I miss it. So if I'm going to fully concede to my innermost self that I'm alcoholic, I best know what it means to be an alcoholic. Right? So, because if I just come in, because when I first came in, they said, "Well, are you an alcoholic?" And I'm like, "Well, sure, yeah. I mean, I must be. I don't, I've had a lot of trouble behind drinking. I don't know anybody that drinks more than I do. I've met some since then. There's some impressive stories in Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, that's what I love about this fellowship. I love when you see a guy up at the podium and he goes, yeah, and then I wrecked my car and I got a DWI with a 4.1 blood alcohol level. And out in the audience we're going, 4.1, that's pretty good right there. I mean, what is it now? It's like a 0.8, I think. So, like I used to wake up with a 0.8, but I'm getting off track again. So here we go. What does it mean to be an alcoholic? Is it getting DWIs? Is it going to jail and that sort of thing? No, that's just stuff that happens to people that drink a lot. What the book talks about is that I have two problems with alcohol. One happens to me when I drink it, and the other one happens to me when I don't drink it. Other than that, I don't struggle with alcohol. I always get real happy when y'all laugh about that one, because sometimes at the treatment center they just look at me and go, when do we smoke? And I love my boys at the treatment center. I'm out there every Wednesday. I just love it. But so when we talk about, we're going to break it down into two things. The first happens to me when I drink it, and that's the physical aspect of alcoholism. And it describes it in the doctor's opinion in the first 23 pages of the book. And it says basically that, and if we go back to, it talks about this physical allergy. It says on Roman numeral 28, and this is a really heavy page. You know what? It's funny. I just learned this the other day. Does anybody have one of just the first 164 pages of the large print that comes from GSO? Rena, what page is this on in that book? It is different, because I told some guys to turn to Roman numeral 28, and I think in that one where it's just, is it Roman numeral 26 or? But wherever the page is that has "We Believe" and "So Suggested" a few years ago. So it's Roman numeral XXIV in that new 164, but in the fourth edition, it's Roman numeral 28. So wherever it is, find it and mark it up, because we're going to spend a lot of time working in this page, and if you're sponsoring a lot of guys, it's going to wind up looking like that by the time you get done with it. There's a lot of really good information on this page, and it says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics. So I love to break this down, because who are we talking about? We're talking about chronic alcoholics here. We're not talking about little disco drunks or, 2 beers and oh dear, or, I burnt the toast and thought I better go to AA or something. We're talking about chronic alcoholism. And it says that the action of alcohol in these guys is the manifestation of an allergy. Well, and it says that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. When I say I like to break this down, it's because this is strange language, right? This is not, anything I tell you about this is stuff I've learned since I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not the way I talked when I was on my way to Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, did anybody ever use manifestation in a sentence? I used to drink at a place called the Spillway Pub in East Dallas. I come from Dallas. I've been in Austin for 40 years, but I don't ever remember going in a Spillway Pub and, leaning up against the bar and going, oh, Bobby. Spiritual malady is on me today. And I had a beer on the way over here, and it has triggered a phenomenon of craving, that's just kicking my young butt. It's like, that didn't work like that, But what are we talking about? Here's some definitions. A manifestation is an exhibition, display, or the way something presents itself. It's just a manifestation of allergy is how it shows up. Allergy, for our purposes, we're just going to say is an abnormal physical reaction. There's something happens to me when I drink 4 ounces of vodka that is abnormal. It doesn't happen to my sister. It doesn't happen to 90% of the population. Only about 10% of the population even has the potential to become alcoholic because of this physical reaction. And what is that physical reaction? It's called the phenomenon of craving. Now, phenomenon just means it's something we don't really understand why it happens, but we know it happens. It's beyond ordinary conception. And so it says, never occurs in the average temperate drinker. there's early on it says, in this statement, the doctor confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I got here, I thought more than anything, there was something wrong with me. There's something in my mind or my morals or something, but I'm like, disease my butt. There is something wrong with me. And we're going to talk about that. I mean, it says it did not satisfy us to be told we couldn't control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or we were outright mental defectives. Does that make you feel right at home? And But it says this allergy interests us. It explains many things, because when you think about it, if you're like me, by the time I get to treatment or an Alcoholics Anonymous, it's not the first time the topic of how loaded Charlie gets has been brought up, right? People have wanted to bring up, but it was never anybody that I identified with. Or my sainted mother, who just turned 95 years old, was a school teacher for 42 years, and she had a way of talking where she would just move this one finger, and she would say, "You are such an idiot. You drink every day." And I remember thinking, Mom, everybody I know drinks every day. And what I didn't know to tell her was that if drinking did for you what it does for me, you'd be stupid not to drink every day. Why would you take a day off from that? And so it says, but we act like everybody on their way to Alcoholics Anonymous knows this stuff, but when you think about this, remember when you would swear to your people that I'm never going to drink again? And I mean it, by God, this time I mean it with and then you think about when they'd see you with a drink in your hand, or they could tell you've been drinking, or you've been telling, and they'd always ask you that question. They'd say, "Man, why did you drink again?" And we give them the only answer we got, which is what? I swear to God, I have said that in rooms as big as 6,500 people, and it's like a chorus in Alcoholics Anonymous. We go, I don't know, God almighty, I don't know. It's just what I do. I hurt people. I lie to people. And by the time I get here, that's what I'm telling you, I think there's something wrong with me. And so it says when it describes this allergy, well, think about this allergy to alcohol. It calls it a phenomenon of craving. And if I have an allergy to strawberries, let's say, or let's say this whole table right here, we get a big old bushel basket of strawberries, and we start eating them together, and we're just sitting around talking, and all of a sudden I start going, and my throat starts swelling shut, and my eyes are puffing up, and I fall over, and I'm turning blue, and you have to call an ambulance in there, and they give me an EpiPen, and I go into anaphylactic shock, and you'd say this guy's got an abnormal physical reaction to strawberries, and the way it manifests is in this throat swelling shut and all that allergic reaction to it. Okay, so we're going to talk. What is how does my allergy to alcohol manifest? And it calls it this phenomenon of craving. This craving that takes place when I take a drink. They can't really explain it, but we've seen it enough to But see, when I take a drink, no matter what my plans were going in, I'm all about drinking now, and I can't control how much I'm going to drink. But see, the thing was, I never thought I'd triggered a phenomenon of craving. I thought I just changed my mind, right? You ever think I'm just going to go in and have a couple of drinks after work with the guys, and then they have a couple, and you're going, I changed my mind. 7 is a good number. I fell in love with a guy at a sober house out in Las Vegas one time. Katie and I were out there carrying a message into this sober house one time, and there's a guy there, and he wasn't trying to be funny or anything, but he's talking, and he goes, "Man, sucks that I'm alcoholic. I wish I wasn't alcoholic so I could drink all the time." Do you love that? I was just like, I feel you, buddy. He goes, I wish I could just have like 7 drinks, and I thought, yeah, not 2, not 3, 7 seems like a reasonable number, but it goes on. So anyway, this craving, it says, it triggers a craving bigger than I am, and I can't control it on my own power. There's a thing in here where Silkworth says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Any argument on that one? I think it's a little understated. I mean, I like banana pudding, but I loved the effect produced by alcohol. I mean, the first time I ever got loaded, I remember thinking, oh, we're going to do this a lot. And from that moment, drinking moved to the center of my life, and whatever else went with it. But it says, the sensation is so elusive that while I admit it's hurting me, that it's injurious, after a while I can't differentiate the true from the false. One of the ways I can't tell the truth from the false is I'm sitting in my 7th treatment center thinking, I ain't like these lames in here. If I ever get, when I get out of here, I'm going to manage this deal a little better. I'm not going to use with those guys anymore. I'm not going to go out to the lake anymore. I'm probably going to study the Bible or something. I don't know, but I don't have to. If I ever get as lame as these guys in here, I might do your little 12-step thing, but right now, I ain't got it like that. I mean, I don't know anybody that's ever walked into their first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and looked up at the steps on the wall and gone, that ought to do it. Anybody? So it says, and then it says, after a while, so I can't tell the truth from, and then I love this one. It says, to me, my alcoholic life seems the only normal one. Sometimes I like to come up with examples of how my alcoholic life seems the only normal one. You want to hear a funny statistic I came across a couple of years ago? This is going to blow your mind. Did you know that most people live their entire lives without ever being arrested? I know, it's crazy. If I was to call my mother and say, Mom, I can't come over, I got to go see my PO and give a UA because I got a DUI, she'd have no idea what I'm talking about, but in here we're like, oh, who's your PO? I can, how much time you got? I can tell you how to beat a UA, and stuff like that. But I mean, so when my mom says you drink all the time, because by the time I get it, we don't go from the way drinking was when I was 16 or 17 to the way it was when I rolled into AA. It happens in little ticks over a period of time, tick, 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 over a period of time, I start doing things I didn't think I would do before. I start compromising my values. I start doing things, and by the time I get here, today looks a lot like yesterday, and yesterday looks a lot like last week, and it feels like I'm just doing what I got to do to get by. But it says, so my alcoholic life seems like the only normal. Well, here's where it gets tricky. That's a big problem. This physical reaction to alcohol, it's a huge problem. That every time I drink, it gets away from me and I can't predict what's going to happen. But it's not my biggest problem. If my biggest problem was what happens to me when I drink 4 ounces of vodka, what would my solution be? Don't drink vodka. Nancy Reagan's little Just Say No program, for some of you girls, that was a president's wife back a long time ago, and she had a thing about just say no to drugs, and it didn't work worth a flip. But the problem I never thought about with this alcoholism and this physical reaction to alcohol is that every time I ever took that first drink, the drink that triggers this next run, every time I ever took that first drink, I was stone cold sober. I can't blame the first drink on being loaded. I make that decision. If we all wrote down the 5 most insane things we've ever done on a piece well, first of all, it'd be a really interesting meeting. But most of us wouldn't put down the most insane thing I've ever done is trying to take another run at drinking and getting loaded and thinking that it's going to go well. The most insane thing I could do would be to try to take another run at this thing based on my evidence, based on my experience in the past. The most important thing you can do with any of the stuff we're talking about is lay it up against your experience and see if it's a fit. See if this is what happens when I drink. And now we're going to talk about what happens when I don't drink. But because it says on page 23, and you don't have to turn there, I'm going to read it to you. It says, these observations, what observations? All these observations we've been making up to now about what happens when I drink, it says it wouldn't mean squat. Well, it says it would be academic and pointless, but it says it wouldn't mean squat what happens to me when I drink if I never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. Why? How? How does it center in my mind? Because, well, this physical out. So when we move on, it starts talking about what happened. We're going back to that Roman numeral 28 or 24 or whatever it is. And down at the bottom of the page, it talks about what happens when I don't drink. And the thing my mother never understood is that it seems like if he'd stop drinking, he's a good boy, But what she didn't understand is what happens when I don't drink. When I stop drinking, my problems don't go away. In fact, it feels like somebody turns the heat up on it a little bit. And after all, it says I get restless, right? I get restless. I don't like the way my clothes are touching me. And if I'm inside sitting down, it feels like I ought to be outside walking around. And if I'm outside walking around, it feels like I ought to be inside laying down. But wherever I'm at, that ain't it. And I just get a little restless. And then it says I get irritable. Now, irritable is kind of uncool. I don't want to be irritable, but it's not my fault if I become keenly aware of how stupid everybody else is, right? You ever go a little while and all of a sudden everybody is a Nimrod. You ever notice in traffic that everybody going slower than me is a moron, and everybody going faster than me is a maniac, so just keep your eyes on me because I'm always going the proper speed. And irritable, it's funny, I talked to this guy today. I haven't talked to him in a year. But one time he called me and he was on his way home from work and he goes, yeah, I got irritated at work today. And he's from Alabama, so I'll do my best shot at Alabama accent. And he goes, I was irritated with my boss at work today. And he says, I found myself being a little irritated in traffic on the way home. And then he says, and then my wife kind of irritated me when I got home. And I said, I hear you talking a lot about being irritated. And he goes, yeah. And I said, you probably wouldn't like being described as irritable. He goes, no, I wouldn't. And I realized that because when I'm irritated, it's y'all's fault. But when I'm irritable, it sounds like there's something wrong with me. And that's a conversation I don't want to have, So I spend all my time focusing on how irritated I am and how irritating everybody else is. And it says, I get irritable. I mean, I always say that, that I get the guy in the grocery store that's got 14 items on the 10-item lane. And the reason I know it it's because God knows I got to be the policeman of the universe. I'm watching everything, and so I got to say, and I'm the guy that's going to go like, okay, buddy, which 4 of those items you want to put back, And if he comes back with the wrong answer, it's a bad day at the grocery store. And next thing you know, I'm having to explain to my family how I got arrested buying milk, But by God, there's chaos in society, and somebody's got to do something about it. Now, I'm also a hypocrite, and I'm big on double standards, so don't step to me if I got 14 items on the 10-item lane, because it's different. I got a story to go with it, and then, like 6 of them are green beans, so really that's 1 item, or something like that. But that'll come more in the 3rd step. But it says I get irritable, and then it says I get discontented. I just don't like the deal I'm getting after a while. I mean, you can give one of us a $200,000 a year job, and in 6 months, I'll tell you how I'm getting screwed around. I'm like going, I'm sure from where you're sitting, it looks like I'm making a lot of money, but you ought to see how much money they're making off of me. And this Nimrod in the next cubicle is making $20,000 a year more than I do, and I'm doing all of my job and half of his, and before you know it, I got to quit, because I can't stand it, and it all builds up until I need relief, and it says, when it says thereby, it says, setting the terrible cycle in motion. That was on page 23, where it says, if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. And it talks about this sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks I see other people taking with impunity. You know what impunity means? It means they don't get punished for it. It means that this guy at work, he gets to go have a couple of drinks after work, and it doesn't cost him his job and his checkbook and his wife and his kids and all the values that he grew up with. He just gets to go have a couple of drinks. And when I get uncomfortable enough, I start wanting to know where's mine. And when I need relief, it's on me. And you can't tell a guy like that, think the drink all the way through, because I'm not capable of it. And so what happens is my main problem wasn't that I couldn't stop drinking. Hell, I stopped drinking twice during one Dallas Cowboys football game. My problem was I couldn't stop starting. Every time I stopped drinking, I always start drinking again. And, we're talking about that second part of alcoholism, because like the difference between my allergy to poison ivy and my allergy to alcohol is I've never one time in my 61 years on this planet been walking out in the woods and looked over and gone, ho, 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 I think that's poison ivy. And off comes my shirt and just roll in it because I don't have this physical obsession with poison ivy, But this spiritual malady that we were talking about earlier drives me to the point. It says the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, this is on page 24, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. I am unable at certain times to bring into consciousness with my sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. I want the people in sober living to hear this part. I'm without defense against the first drink. We're talking about there's a thing on page 24 right before that where it says we pass into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of no avail. Most of us know the only requirement for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous is what? A desire to stop drinking will get you a front row seat in any AA meeting in the world, but it says right there on page 24, it won't do a darn thing to keep me sober. It says we pass into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. I cross this invisible line where I've lost the power of choice and control. I don't know when it happened. I think that's why we call it an invisible line. But somewhere along the line, I lost the power of choice and control, and I got to where I couldn't. And I'm a big fan of pawn shops. Any other pawn shoppers here tonight? Joe, my man. I loved everything about pawn shops. I loved the purity of the equation. I loved the fact that I don't ever remember walking in a pawn shop and having the guy go, "Good God, man, weren't you just here this morning?" Or what do you intend to do with this money? It's not like that. You just go in there with the shotgun and they give you the money, and then you go back with the deer rifle and they give you the money, and then you go back with the sterling silver and they give you the money. And I had a plan. We drunks make some good plans. I mean, we make plans you could take over the university and they'd look it over and go, "That's a pretty solid plan," and our plans work right up till they quit working, and my plan was that I had 90 days to get everything out of the pawn shop. I had a 90-day cycle of this thing, and I could usually pull some kind of a scam or do some kind of a deal during that 90 days that would get everything out, and we keep all this going. Well, except for I'm a blackout drinker and my life is unmanageable, and so one time I pulled this insurance scam, and I had enough money to go get everything out of the pawn shops and pay off and I'm going to stop by the Spillway Pub because it was the only place that would let me run a tab. So it's very important to settle the tab at the Spillway Pub. But we're not going to go crazy or anything. We're just going to go in and pay off our tab, and then we got a lot of ground to cover. And I came out of a blackout. I had a lot of blackouts where I don't remember the drive home or big parts of the evening before. But I came out of a blackout 5 days later. And I'll never forget it. I was sitting on the edge of the bed at my mother's house. I should tell you before we go any further, I was so poorly treated as a child that I ran away from home for good at the age of 28. I'm serious. Never went back. And that drives Katie crazy because she started working at 15. But no, I had some apartments and stuff, but like any good gangster, I always wind up back at Mom's house. But I wake up and I'm sitting on the edge of the bed at my mother's house, and I can still tell you the color of the carpet, the piece of furniture that was in front of me, the clock that was on that, the wallpaper, the temperature of the room, because I remember coming out of that blackout, and in this pocket I had $8, and in this pocket I still had all those pawn tickets. And I hadn't gotten a darn thing out of the pawn shop. And we've all had those mornings where I was just going, "Oh, no." Oh, no. Because I'd shot my wad on that first scam, and now I got nothing, man. And I was a jerk. I was an alcoholic, but I was not a sociopath, and I wasn't going to sell my dad's shotgun for $40. And my dad was a good man. My dad was working for all of his stuff. Nobody was giving him his stuff. And I would have to go to my father, who's a good man, and say, Dad, listen, if we act now, I can get you a pretty good deal on all your stuff, but if we wait till tomorrow, it's strictly retail, And, are there any Al-Anons in the room tonight by a show of hands? 1, 2, 3. Well, for the Al-Anons in the room, we know that ain't funny, but I have to tell that like it's a joke, because if I tap back into the desperation of that morning, I'll warn you in advance, it's going to happen anyway. I'm a big guy. I shoot shotguns competitively. I ride Harleys, all that stuff. I'm liable to cry like a little girl in a pink dress up here at any minute, But if I tap into that desperation of that morning, I won't finish for a minute, because I would have to go to my dad, and the thing was, we would have to get in his truck and go get everything. And Dallas is a big, spread out city. Here Jacksonville is too. That Jill said it takes 30 minutes to go anywhere, but it wasn't like we're just going to get in the car and go to the pawn shop. We got to go up on Buckner Boulevard and get your shotgun and your deer rifles up on East Grand, and we got to go out on Garland Road and get the metal detectors, and your sterling silver is over in Oak Cliff, so it was all day in the truck with me and my dad and all that shame. And when we'd be driving around, I'd be going, Dad, I swear to God, I will never do this again. I swear to God, I'll never do this again. I don't want to feel like this. I don't want you to feel like this. I swear to God, I'll never do this again. What I didn't know riding in the car with him that day was that I didn't have the power to make good on that promise. When I was promising him that I would never do this again, I might as well promise you people that I could flap my arms up here and fly around this room and come back and land up here, because I did not have the power to make good on that promise. Within 2 or 3 days of making that promise, I'd hit the back door of my dad's house like a cat burglar, and it was just like that, and off we'd go to the pawn shop. And before I got sober, my father and I had made the rounds of the pawn shops 3 times. That's how cool I was. That's how slick I was. That's the guy I brought to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a burden to anyone that was unfortunate enough to love me or care about me. And so anything, when we talk about a hopeless state of mind and body, it says after they have succumbed to the desire again, and so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops. So I drink and the phenomenon of craving. I pass through the well-known stage of a spree. How do we come out of a run like that? It says emerging remorseful with a firm resolution to never drink again. And it says this is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. This terrible cycle that the book talks about, we get trapped in this deal. Now you understand when we're laying this out for the new guy. There's something that happens when I drink in this cycle. I drink and I drink and I drink, and it starts getting really bad after a while, and things start getting away from me until I have to stop or I get stopped. And now I've stopped, and things are getting a little better. Maybe I'm making too big of a deal out of this thing. I've stopped for a while, but now I start getting restless. I start getting irritable, and then eventually I have to drink. So what happens is I drink until I have to stop, and I stop until I have to drink. And then I drink until I have to stop, and I stop until I have to drink. And if you're caught in that terrible cycle, believe me, there's a bottom below the bottom you know. I always tell the guys I work with, don't ever say it can't get any worse. That just shows a lack of imagination. Because you may look up in a few years ago, my God, I wish I'd quit back in 2018 when things were still going pretty good. But, good, thanks, Amy. So that's this hopeless, and it says, and it's going to shift gears here, because it says, unless a psychic change can take place, there's very little hope of my recovery. the thing we're talking about, the reason we spend so much time taking step one is because I'm trying to transmit a step one experience to this guy. There is no good news at the end of step one. This would be a really awful program if all we had was step one. You know, imagine if we get Eric in here and we go, okay, so Eric, here's the deal. You got a body that ain't regular. Whenever you drink, it's always going to get away from you. It's going to trigger this craving for more booze. It's a huge problem. It's not your biggest problem, though. You got a mind that's going to get so uncomfortable that you're going to drink again every time, every time, every time. Really sorry. Try to have a nice day. You know, but that's all we had if we just had step one. But what we do in step one is there is something that happens where I've gone out to treatments. I love going to treatment centers and talking about this stuff because I can't tell you how many times guys have come up to me and gone, man, I have been in and out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous for 18 years, and I have never heard the stuff you're talking about. That doesn't mean nobody was talking about it, but he never heard it. But there is something that happens when a guy has a step one experience where this I'm an alcoholic moves from in between my ears down into the middle of my chest, and you see them lean forward and they go, hold on just a minute. I've never heard the stuff you're talking about before, and it's explaining a lot of stuff I've never been able to explain. It explains why when I start drinking, it always gets away from me. And it also explains why when I really want to stop, I can't pull it off. And if I've got it the way you describe it, I got no shot. I got absolutely no shot. Now is when we can get moving, because there is something that happens in that crushing moment of awareness. There is an awareness, and then there's a willingness. There's a surrender that takes place in that moment, and strapped to that surrender is a willingness to go through the rest of the work. That's what happened with Dr. Bob. It says when the broker explained to him what Silkworth had told him, he went after it with muster he'd never had before, and he sobered never to drink again for the rest of his life. 15 years. He worked with 5,000 drunks after that. That was the power of Dr. Bob understanding what the problem was. So this thing, now we're going to roll into this thing where we're talking, after we've had the step one experience, on page 28, it says, and I'm almost done here, it says, we in our turn sought the same escape with the desperation of a drowning man. You know what's awesome about working with drowning men? They don't ask a lot of questions, you know? I mean, you know, when I'm in an unsurrendered state, I'm going to have a lot of questions. I need to know what we're going to do. I need to know what it's going to go like. What's the end result going to be? What's it going to feel like while we're doing it? And it seems like it's really important for me to approve of the whole process. But when you say, when I'm crushed by that step one experience, all you're going to hear out of me is, what do you want me to do? And the next thing you're going to hear out of me is, okay, I did that. Now what do you want me to do? Man, it's such a powerful thing, because all of a sudden this thing takes on a whole new energy. And when we start talking, now is when we start talking about a power greater than ourselves. And Katie's going to talk about it. But I don't know why I would give a flip about a power greater than myself if I still think my power is going to get the job done. But at the moment that I've had this step one experience, all of a sudden I'm like, what do you got for me? You know, and I don't have a whole lot of questions. I mean, you don't have the drowning man go, pardon me, before we proceed, how much experience do you have with drowning men? You know, is this your only boat? I'm not fond of blue, you know, and that sort of thing. You know, and it's just like, help me. And it says right after that, it says, what seemed at first to be a flimsy reed. You think about if you're drowning, all you got to hold on to is a little cattail. It says it turned out to be the loving and powerful hand of God. but I ain't going to reach for it until I think that I'm powerless. So there's a thing that talks about, the book describes it about 5 different ways. It calls it a psychic change. It calls it a spiritual experience. It calls it a change of heart. It calls it a spiritual awakening. There's a place where it calls it a personality change sufficient to overcome alcoholism. But it's not going to be interesting to me if I still think my power will get it done. When they snuffed out that last flicker of hope for Fred is when he got serious. And so we're going to talk a lot more about all this stuff, but studying all this stuff won't do the job. We're going to get a lot of awareness this weekend, and we're going to get right up next to the solution. But this is the program of action. What we're hoping is that you'll go home and take some of this with you. But to finish off step 1, I want to read something that says on page 43. See if you think this is important. Once more, they're trying to drive it home now. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases. Neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. We know that people have problems with God. Half of our fellowship has problems with the idea of a power greater than ourselves. It also means half of us didn't. But of the half that did, I love the plaque where it says in one part of We Agnostic, it's like going, you got a big problem with God? It's not going to be a big problem. To the guy sitting there. But okay, what happens though is every step calls for the next step, and step 1 drives me into the rest of this work. So as we're going through the rest of the work, I've got this step 1 experience to tap into, because Mark used to tie everything back to my step 1 experience. So when you get up here and he goes, "Hey, Charlie, you want to write inventory?" And you're like, "No, not particularly, no." And he goes, "Well, let me ask you this: would you rather write inventory or drink vodka?" And you're like, dang. Compared to what happens to me when I drink vodka, writing inventory is a walk in the park. Do you want to make these amends? No, not particularly. Would you rather, what if my 2 choices are live life, die an alcoholic death, or live life on a spiritual basis? That's that turning point that we're going to talk about, is go on to the bitter end, accept spiritual help. So we're going to take a short break. A 15-minute break, and then I'm going to hand it over to Katie. Thanks, everybody.
Well done. You had an hour and 10.
Perfect.
On.